very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the webinar on Manage the Impacts on Supply Chain during COVID-19, organized jointly by the MBG Group and Rhenus Logistics. My name is Anjali Gupta. I head the corporate communication team for Rhenus India and will be the moderator for today's webinar. The spread of COVID-19 has affected almost all the spheres of human life: physical, emotional, and economic. In India, we are all navigating through this current lockdown. Businesses are grappling with this unforeseen crisis and trying to mitigate several challenges. Like every other crisis, our society, our communities, and our businesses will emerge from this pandemic more stronger, more resilient, and more innovative than before. But this recovery is going to be a marathon and not a sprint. Now is the time for companies to prepare well in order to fix any disruptions in their supply chains and to be fully functional again when the lockdown is over. Today we have an audience of more than 100 people attending this webinar. I would like to thank each one of you for taking out time and attending this. We are truly thankful and overwhelmed by your response. The participants today are from various industries, including automotive, manufacturing, chemicals, medical equipment, engineering, construction, finance, scientific research, and development. So Mr. Arya is a well-known figure in the logistics industry. He has now been involved in the business for over 33 years, and he has transformed the family trucking business into a full-fledged integrated logistics company. His flagship company, Rhenus Logistics, of which he is the managing director, is a joint venture with Rhenus, a large multi-billion German-based group. Rhenus as a group has an annual turnover of 5.5 billion euros, employing more than 33,000 employees globally, catering to various logistics needs of the companies. The Indian operations are spread across 69 locations and employs more than 1,600 people. Under the leadership of Mr. Arya, Rhenus India has been a recipient of several awards and recognitions from the Government of India, industry, and several customers. The latest being the Pride of India Award by the Ministry of Transport. He is also an avid reader and travels extensively.
Yeah, good morning once again. Vivek Arya here, and I'm going to talk about managing your logistics better. And I hope that during this presentation, I will also be in a position to answer the question, Lucas, which you received. So the general update is that we all know that the lockdowns, national lockdowns, have been extended until 3rd of May. Since then, the government has come up with a lot of notifications. Initially, there was notification that the customs would work 24/7, and then there were notifications regarding the movement of essential and non-essential items. However, in reality, the things at ground level were much different. On the 20th April, the government announced further measures to open a few sectors within the logistics. They allowed movement of goods inter and intrastate. They also allowed operations of the airport and related facilities for air transport, cargo, and relief evacuations. Operations of seaports and ICDs and authorized CHS. All facilities in supply chain of essential goods, cold storage and warehousing services, including at ports, airports, container depots, and other links in logistics chain. Conditional relaxations in effort to provide relief to the underprivileged and daily earners and wage earners. These were some of the activities which have been permitted since 20th of April. Some of the states, in the meantime, since 20th of April, withdrew some of the relaxations because of the new COVID cases, and these were Maharashtra, Delhi, Punjab, Telangana, who withdrew the relaxations. The areas which observe very few relaxations, government is reviewing the exit from the lockdown in a very cautious and gradual manner. Government has also announced that if there are new cases of COVID, they will withdraw the relaxations. Hotspots have been identified in various regions and termed as red, orange, and green. There are a district currently in hotspot can move to a green category if no cases arise in 28 days. Post withdrawal of the relaxations in Maharashtra especially, the attendance at the ports and the CFS and the airports has reduced further since the 23rd of April. The number of employees, whether at the CFS, blue collar, white collar, or at the customs offices are far too low. The big challenge going forward would be how soon the workers will resume back to work, whether we talk about ports, ICDs, CFS, airports, because most of the laborers working there have migrated to their hometowns. Even post-lockdown, fear and uncertainty will still linger, and it will take a long time for the workers to come back to their jobs. To answer the question again back, how many months will it take for normalcy? Or will this be the new normal? We have to wait and watch. The positive outcome of this whole thing has been there has been a much more momentum in the digitization process which the government had initiated in the last years. Talking about different products, so the way this presentation is structured is we will talk about ocean and air, we will talk about customs, domestic freight, and warehousing in different slides. Talking about ocean freight, the port operations have been going on. Shipping lines, most of them, because of the congestion at ports, have revised their sailing schedules and contemplating further revisions. The workforce at the CFS, whether blue collar or white collar, is very low at the moment. There is a priority in handling essential goods. However, the government is pushing to move non-essential items from the ports and the CFS to decongest the whole supply chain there. However, the problem is that most of the factories are closed and the customers who will take delivery from the port are not able to offload at their factories. The drive from the government to decongest is not limited to Nhava Sheva, but also for Chennai and Kattupalli. And they have also allowed the warehouses in some of the vicinities like Bhiwandi or Chennai or Delhi to remain open to offload the import cargo. Similarly, on the air freight, as we all know that the passenger crafts are not moving anymore, especially the international and domestic routes. So most of the cargo which is moving in and out of the country or domestically is moving through air freight, which are through freighter operations. The government has also recognized the need to decongest the airports, and the clearances are happening at the various airports as we talk. Air freight capacities and rates have been very volatile in the last weeks, and we will see volatile going forward. Most of the passenger aircrafts have been converted into freighters to add capacities in the supply chain. Post-lockdown, we believe that there will be a huge surge in demand while the capacities will remain low in the next months for both air and ocean. There will be a huge gap in the demand and supply, hence the pricing will be dominating the supply chain. There will also be an equipment imbalance, which will be a great challenge for the exporters to have empty containers in India, or for the importers to find empty containers in Europe, US, or China will be a big challenge. There will be a huge pressure on the stressed infrastructure. So we know that our ports and the CFS are already working to the limits. And with the increased pressure in the next months, there will be a huge stress on all seaports, airports, CFS, etc. Here are some statistics. So far, the statistics from the March have been published. If you look at this information, the number of TUs that was discharged in March 2019 were 2,37,000. Vis-a-vis March 2020, we have seen 2,17,000. So there is a drop of 20,000 TUs. Though in March, we had only about 6 days of lockdown. Once the April numbers are published, we will see a more drastic reduction. The number of TUs that was loaded for export in March was 2,33,000. However, March 2020, it was 1,92,000. So we saw a reduction of 40,000 TUs, which is almost 20%. Overall, total TUs transaction was less by 60,000, which is about 13%. As of 25th of April, there were 107 vessels across various ports which were berthed and were discharging cargo. And similarly, there were 128 vessels waiting in the anchorage to get proper berths. Due to this congestion, which you can see from the ships standing there for discharging and berthing there, we will see in going forward a lot of blank sailings, which means that the shipping lines will cancel the sailings to India to avoid the congestion. And we also see a significant pileups at the various ports and CFS, so the ports are not able to discharge any further cargo. We at Rhenus are making all efforts to minimize the impacts on your shipments. We have core carrier programs with the airlines and the ocean carriers. We are securing additional spaces and commitments from the carriers. We have regular movements on key routes for air freight. We are also doing air consoles using the chartering services, and we are organizing customs clearance at all major airports. For the ocean, again, we are talking to all our core carriers for securing space. LCL movements, as we talk, is continuing to happen. However, due to the reduced manpower at the CFS, managing the in and out of the LCL from the CFS is a challenge at the moment. For export shipments, we are organizing containers for our customers, mainly for essential, medical, food supplies, etc. And customers who have e-sealing facilities have a smooth export even as on date. Rhenus has the capability and does door-to-door movement of exempt cargo. And we are also organizing customs clearance at all ports as well as ICDs and CFSs. On the customs clearance, as we all know, the customs, the ports, the CFS, ICDs were all exempted during the lockdown days to facilitate clearances. However, as I mentioned, in reality, the workforce, whether at the CFS or the customs office, was very low. Most of the transactions were completed online with minimum human interface. Yet, as we talk as on date, the presence of customs officials at the airport is very low. Rhenus capabilities, so all our back office activities are happening like control tower, documentation, customs filing, online processing with minimum disruptions. Most of our people are working from home and well coordinated on our IT networks. All necessary permissions are in place at Rhenus to operate our customs department. Yesterday, we also got permission to operate our office. There is no change in availability of resources once the offices were allowed to open since 21st April, but practically we got the permission only yesterday. Post-lockdown, what we foresee is there will be a huge congestion at ports and airports, and this will take a lot of time to revert back to normalcy. There will be surge in volumes, needs, and expectations. Manpower challenge will continue. Rhenus is equipped to handle large volumes at all ports and airports, and we are mobilizing our resources. The biggest positive outcome of the lockdowns have been digitization. So the government of India has actually working on the e-Sanchit program, which was launched a few months back. And now we have the port community services, which is also working on the network connecting all the port services as well as the shipping lines, forwarders, etc. There are various platforms like Bolero, CargoX, Waves, and TradeLens, which also have offered the possibility to having a e-bills of lading. So it would be our advice for customers to also explore the possibilities of moving to digitization. On the domestic freight, the inter and intrastate movements of all trucks with one driver and one additional person has been allowed, irrespective of the nature of the cargo. However, the government always wanted that the non-essential trucks deliver the cargo and come back to movement of the essential products, which is mainly food and agri products. Rhenus has been mobilizing trucks for its customers who deal with food, agrochemicals, pesticides, and their ancillary units, as well as pharma and the ancillary units. Empty trucks are allowed to go for pickup as well as return back after dropping the cargo. Railways, airports, seaports, and custom authorities have been authorized to issue passes to the staff or contractual laborers. As I mentioned, so Rhenus capabilities, we are organizing all sorts of essential movements pan-India. We have special permissions from the concerned authorities. And during these times also, we are able to offer our customers with real-time tracking and updates. Post-lockdown, we believe the biggest problem post-lockdown would be drivers and the laborers. In India, we have a very significant portion of drivers which are basically moving into work in other parts of the country from Rajasthan, UP, Bihar. So they are migrant drivers, and they have all gone back to their hometowns during the lockdown days. And it will be a challenge how soon they will get back to the duty. Even once they return back to the duty, organizing their medical certificates and getting them fit to work would also be a big challenge. Similarly, sanitization of the vehicles, the drivers, the cleaners, the plant and the warehouse, etc. will be a challenge going forward. This will all lead to a very high commercial impact due to a huge gap between the demand and supply. And currently, as we talk, mainly the trucks which are moving around the country are driver owner trucks who are dependent solely on the trucks for their wages. So they are driving. The professional drivers will take time to come back to duty. These were some of the polls. So you will also see a poll being organized by Anjali going forward. But there was a poll done with some of the truckers across the country to understand their expectations by when things will resume to normal. Going by these graphs, so the fleet operators, which are the large fleet operators, they believe that the normalcy will return. 21% of them believe the normalcy will return by Q1 of 2021. However, the large chunk, the majority chunk, believes that the normalcy will return in Q4 of 2020, which is October to December. 28% believe that the normalcy should return from July to September. These are on the basis of assuming that the lockdowns do not get extended further. The owner drivers, the vast majority of them believe that the normalcy will return between July-September, which is Q3 of 2020. 40% believe that normalcy will return between October and December, which is 2020. And a very small percentage believes that the normalcy will take as long as Q1 of 2021. On the warehousing front, so the current status is that warehouses and the cold storages are allowed to operate. The stipulations will apply to all areas other than areas requiring containment, hotspots as per the ministry guidelines. Unfortunately, a lot of warehousing hubs, logistics hubs, have been under the red zones and containment hubs. All movements of persons and vehicles shall be subject to strict adherence of norms, hygiene, and social distancing. Current withdrawal of relaxations, which was from the 23rd of April, is also causing a lot of confusion at the moment. At Rhenus, we started our inbound operations for import shipments with restricted manpower and working hours following all the social distancing norms. Outbound operations were mainly limited to essential goods, again, food, pharma, etc. We have been supporting our customers, especially from the government projects, coal mining, hospitals, solar energy, by doing movements and dispatches during these times. What we foresee during post-lockdown, that a huge spike in demand across all regions, because most of the customers will have spillover in inventories, whether finished goods, raw materials. So the need for spillovers and temporary storage will be much higher. I think every customer will relook at their supply chain and their inventory levels, which we believe may lead to increase in the storage spaces. What have we been doing during the lockdowns? So we have been offering value-added services, round-the-clock operations to our customers. We are facilitating and organizing permissions from local collectors, authorities, and we are servicing pharma, medical equipment, diagnostics, agrochemicals, and pesticides warehousing and movement. Post-lockdown, we believe that we have warehousing capabilities across India. Most of the laborers which work in Rhenus warehouses are local laborers, so we believe that they should resume to duty well in time. We will have to observe the social distancing norms, and which will lead to slow throughput and will require 24/7 operations. Our warehouses are equipped and they are modern warehouses with mechanized handling, so we can handle larger volumes. And we have business continuity plans rolled out for all our warehouses. Post-lockdown. So I think from our side, the advice would be that there should be a focus on rebuilding the supply chain. We believe that it would be very important for the senior management to be involved in the supply chain decisions, because there will be a gap in the demand and supply, and the capacities will be limited at a premium price. So the quick decision making would be required to lock in the available capacities. So we believe that it would need senior management involvement. Most of the supply chain managers will have to have a holistic view on the supply chain, and will have to make a lot of trade-offs in terms of service, pricing, etc. These are built on 3 pillars going forward. So most of the government directives have to be well documented so that there are no gaps and there is clear understanding on the way the operations will be managed. Most of the repairs, maintenance shops, driver passes in the normal course should be organized well. And digitization. I think digitization is here to come and stay for a long time, and most of the customers and companies will have to make provisions of how to digitize their processes. These are some of the steps post-lockdown. Though I will not read all these points here, we can share these slides with you. Right from entry gate, what are the various measures we need to adopt, to communication notice boards, operations at the warehouse, at management level, canteen level at critical activities, emergency response, transportation, training and awareness, sanitization and disinfection, and disposal. So customers will have to draw their own wheels and probably build the plan around this. At Rhenus, we have been doing a project for the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and Indian Red Cross Society, where we facilitate the imports of masks, ventilators, gloves, goggles, temperature meters, protective equipments, suits, etc. So customs clearance, moving to our warehouse, kitting, and then delivery pan-India. So far, we've handled 52,000 boxes with 52 million pieces. So at Rhenus, employee safety is in the forefront. We have business continuity plans for all sites, including offices and warehouses. We are regularly monitoring the hygiene standards. For example, yesterday we were given permission to open the offices, so all our offices have been sanitized yesterday. We have constituted a special task force to monitor the situation on a daily basis during these times. We are keeping all our employees informed. The fumigation, fogging of all warehouses and offices, and all necessary prevention measures as directed by WHO and the law of the land. So we are here to connect the pieces in the supply chain. This last sticker which you see on the right side of the screen, this was an offer which we put out in the market, especially to help customers who have cargo lying at Delhi airport or the ICDs and CFS and would like to move them quickly to avoid detention damage. So we would be happy to clear it and move it to our warehouse in Farooq Nagar and temporarily store it for our customers. Yeah, so that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Arya, and apologies for the technical glitches which happened some time back. We have a few questions for you. We will take a few of them now in the time permitted, and the remaining questions we will get back to the audience through email or a phone call after the webinar. So the first question says, what is going to be the impact on logistics both inbound and outbound, during lockdown and after the lockdown? How do we oversee it?
So as I said in my presentation, I think the biggest problem would be the huge gap between demand and supply. And we will see a surge in the pricing because the capacities will be low. The shipping lines have decided to change their sailing schedules. They're blank sailings. The airlines do not operate the passenger aircrafts. So it's mainly the freighter aircrafts. So lower capacities, high surge in demand will lead to a huge price gap. Yeah, Anjali.
Thank you. Another question. Volatility in rates, is it because of shortage of flights? When the rates are fixed, how can they increase prices, is what one of our audience is asking.
So these are force majeure conditions, and most of the airlines and shipping lines have withdrawn their contractual obligations. And globally, because of the pandemic, these are announced as force majeure conditions. So they are not obliged under the contracts to fulfill their obligations on the pricing. And you have to also understand that the shipping lines and the airlines are bleeding profusely. They have vessels waiting all over the ports. They have their manpower and the airlines. So we have been reading in the newspapers that if the airlines and the shipping lines do not get government help, most of them will go bankrupt. So under the given circumstances, I guess they have very limited choices but to increase the prices. Yes, Anjali.
A lot of logistics companies operate with e-commerce. How do you see the definition of non-essentials in India?
So in India, the essentials have been mainly defined as food-related products, packaging industry, ancillary units, or pharmaceuticals, packaging or ancillary units, or medical equipments, diagnostic equipments, even farm equipments, agrochemicals, pesticides. These have been few items which have been prescribed under the essential items.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Even power industry, yes, power industry, for example, Sorry, go back, Anjali.
Yeah, sure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run a quick poll, which you will all see on your screens. The poll has been launched already. Just select one of the answers there, and also would like to share the results of the poll. So we see that a very interesting 43% of you expect that by October and to December, that's Q4 of 2020, we will come back to normalcy. Mr. ABHIJEET Sharma from the MBG group. Mr. Sharma has more than 12 years of experience involving internal audits, compliance reviews, financial due diligence, business intelligence framework, investigations, and Forsynic audits. He has led diversified internal audit and Forsynic assignments across geographies, including control evaluations, process reviews, SOP documentation and implementation, fraud risk assessments, investigations, and anti-bribery and corruption reviews. His professional experience includes working with the risk advisory practice of the Big Four and leading international consulting firms across the BFSI domain in risk and compliance functions. He has handled different engagements across manufacturing, power, automotive, infrastructure, pharma, travel, financial services, to name a few. ABHIJEET is a chartered accountant, a law graduate, and also a chartered fellow of Insurance Institute of India. ABHIJEET, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anjali. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of MBG Corporate Services, I extend a warm welcome to all of you for joining the webinar. By introduction, I am ABHIJEET Sharma. I work as a director managing the risk advisory portfolio for the firm. In this webinar, I shall touch base on the key challenges faced by industries in supply chain business, in midst of global outbreak of COVID-19 and the remedial measures of risk management to handle continuity of business during these challenging and testing times. So from a business continuity plan risk management perspective, we would like to mention that the global pandemic bearing the name COVID-19 has become a name synonym with risky and turbulent situations witnessed by corporates across the globe. COVID-19 has forced companies to rethink, reconsider, and re-strategize their business models, duly identifying the alternatives to manage supply chain risks. Hence, building of a business continuity plan as a risk management measure has become mandatory for organizations. So before I move forward, I would also like to give a background of the firm wherein Prometheus Minds work to develop tangible solutions for clients. MBG Corporate Services is an established firm in India which started in 2002. As you can see from the slide, we started in the year 2002 and developed a consulting practice across different service functions of assurance, advisory, and taxation. The firm is headquartered at Singapore and has expanded its operations across prominent business geographies. The firm has a skilled team of professionals and caters to domestic and international clients across different sectors. So if you go through the slide, look into the slide. So we have a detailed sector coverage wherein we talk about automobile, iron, steel, metals and mining and the like. So we have a good deal of sector exposure. And these clients across different sectors are suitably supported by the Indian and international business desks. Next slide, please. The firm, as you can see on the global map, we have witnessed a good growth trajectory courtesy the support from clients. And we have major offices in countries including India, UAE, Singapore, Japan, Germany, and China. The pandemic, while has affected the global economies and resulted in disruptions of business, while we are talking, we have spoken at length about the background and the disruption. It is also important to understand the new learnings which this pandemic has given over a period of time. The learnings emphasize on the sustainability and emerging stronger through change management, adopting alternative working models, and redesigning ways to do business. The primary learning towards managing disruptions in production, supply chain, cash flows, and working capital management is the essence is to have a business continuity plan, which is the first point on the learning map. It is equally important to have the plan stress tested to assess the workability and implementation. Organizations may have designed the plan, but whether the plan can stand the test of time is important to be understood. Staying remote and going digital are the new learnings to manage social distancing. Exploring alternatives or replacements or substitutions to the sources of supply chain business has become imperative. And the culmination of all learnings vest in organizations having a defined and proactive risk control mechanism. Next slide, please. Industry sectors are struggling to trying to come up to terms with the economic disruption, duly affecting the existence and running of business operation. The slide basically summarizes the impacted industry sectors in disproportionate measures. So while some industries appear to be impacted less, some appear to have been impacted substantially. It is important to note that the counteractive measures by industries towards risk mitigation will decide the positioning and standing of corporates in an era of pre-corona and post-corona. The key challenges on the industries which we've mentioned across, they are of illustrative value. The list is not exhaustive. We have tried to come to a point of commonality wherein the key challenges can be mentioned, which would be around unavailability of control procedures in the remote working environment, shortage of material, facing liquid crisis management for effective cash flows, having receivable delays with financial impact of working capital blockage, focusing on regulatory compliances which need to be done which is the need of the hour, incurrence of financial and operational costs due to increased cost of product development, and lastly, the burden of unwarranted cost obligations due to absence of specific contractual terms. Next slide, please. The vulnerable exposure and remedial framework of supply chain business has been mentioned in the next 3 slides, wherein we will talk about supply disruption and how it can be managed, followed by operational disruption, demand disruption, financial disruption, information security, and logistics disruption. So while the problems have been spoken at length, we are trying to focus more on the solutions to mitigate the risk. So talking about the supply chain, supply disruption, the focus on the key suppliers and understanding the contingency plan for continuation of supply is of paramount importance. Identification of backup suppliers so as to reduce the focus on certain concentrated ones is equally important. Ascertaining single points of failure in the supply chain ecosystem to minimize roadblocks has to be seen, and conducting a supply chain vulnerability audit on customers to work backwards on the supply chain model is of paramount importance. On the operational disruption side, it is important to impart education and training to employees regarding the pandemic preventions and health safety measures. We need to have a working guideline to manage absenteeism of employees so that quality and productivity is not affected. Optimization of production and distribution capacity through rotational shifts is important. Planned closure and rerouting production to the less riskier locations within the country has to be understood, and prioritize production of products to ensure optimal utilization of available raw material and inventory sources is the need of the hour. On the demand side, assessment of the demand impact specific to client's business to ensure smooth revenue projections. So what was projected, actually it is moving in line. That is very, very important. Revisiting of the costs. At this point of time, cost assessment is an impeccable requirement. So revisiting the cost of carrying inventory vis-a-vis cost of holding inventory is important. Estimate the estimation of the available inventory has to be done. Comparison of the cost of stockpiling of inventory against the risk of losing customers is an important measure. And lastly, assessment of carrying cost of inventory vis-a-vis just-in-time delivery has to be assessed. The financial impact also has to be seen on the cash flows and net working capital. Understanding of the security disruptions of IT, that equally is an important measure. Now we come to the roadmap of business continuity plan as to what we are talking about and what does the roadmap tend to achieve. So corporates have witnessed these risks. So as a roadmap, we've tried to highlight the primary objective, which is help to resume the operations in midst of any unforeseen contingency. If you look at the structure, we need to have a defined responsibility matrix for employees and vendors, along with the risk mitigation framework and impact analysis of potential losses. As a firm, we have carved out solutions in the form of business management services, wherein we have come up with 4 solutions which can help organizations to make sure that the business continuity risks are met, starting with the drafting of operational guidelines, wherein which define the working protocols for usage of IT framework for management approvals, attendance monitoring, and a remote working environment. Security guidelines also follow suit in this section, which help the employees to avoid phishing attacks and manage cyber attacks. Also, the health and safety measures as a part of working protocol are would be mentioned in these operational guidelines. Revisiting and evaluation of business functions has to be done, because while the control procedures might have been drafted, it is important whether they are sufficient enough to withstand the business continuity risk. We have mentioned key business functions, and we would emphasize that the reevaluation of controls need to be done. Conducting a business health check review and followed by a business continuity plan to reforecast trading cash flows and alternatives to manage supply chain risk has to be seen. This is an important section of the presentation wherein operational guidelines are being talked about. So documentation of policies for usage of IT assets, managing authorizations, verification and reconciliation of processes, leaves, holidays, transportation and safety, and resuming of business operations is a key wherein the operational guidelines need to be designed for the different entities. The drafting of control procedures, as I mentioned previously, they have to be seen that a detailed review of risk registers and risk control matrices with the entity level controls is important to understand whether the going concern assumption of the business would last or not. We have highlighted key business functions which we feel are important to ensure existence and monitored through a stable vigil mechanism. Next slide, please. In testing times where organizations are looking for solutions to reduce costs and optimize on the direct and indirect cost measures, revenue assurance and mitigation risk can be provided through this service. This is a business health check review wherein we talk about cost control opportunities, cover the risk exposure, and identify improvement opportunities in the control environment. Next slide, please. The review, if you look into the diagram, so the review, previous slide, Anjali, please. So if you go to the diagram, the review of a health check would help us to identify the competitive, operational, compliance, financial, and conflict of interest impairment. So this is a very important solution for corporates where we can cover the risk. From a business transaction support, for managing the continuity of business remotely, it is important to have a vigil mechanism on the flow of transactions. If you look at the workflow, we made sure that the controls are mentioned at each point on the flow of transaction, starting from the approval stage to payment stage, in order to negate any potential issue or compromisation of weak control framework. It is important that segregation of duties and formalized delegation of authority needs to be monitored and revisited. Next slide, please. So by this time, what all we've spoken at length about supply chain, this is a solution summary to manage the disruptions and a one-stop risk solution to manage supply chain business, where we talk about understanding the ecosystem, identifying the exposure, reviewing of the documentation to identify any financial risks and suggest control measures, alternative working model to manage supply chain disruption, looking for replacement of suppliers, analyzing vendors' ability to meet the commitments, determining short-term marketing strategies through online medium, reviewing of contractual arrangements to identify client obligations, review of force majeure on the material contracts, assessment of contractual obligations to avoid any unwarranted penal measures to the company, review of financial exposure due to breach of contract, and lastly, developing alternative communication channels and response strategy in anticipation in case, God forbid, the remote working environment continues to extend. So this is a kind of a response plan to COVID-19 from a supply chain business, wherein the firm as MBG has developed a business management service. We can help clients to make sure that they are able to handle the risk effectively. Next slide, please. In line with the earlier slide, while the previous slide talked about managing the supply chain disruptions, this slide has a twofold message, wherein on one part we are talking about revamping of the financial model and assessing the spectrum of cash flows in midst of economic slowdown. This is of paramount importance. And on the other side, we talk about reforecasting the funds and remonitoring of the credit arrangements to ensure that liquidity crunch is managed and solvency in business is maintained. Next slide, please. So while we have mentioned the solutions in the form of a business management service, we would also like to assure our clients and the audience out here that these services can be managed optimally and effectively, because these services while help in identification of cost minimization, hedging profitability and revenue reduction, managing the business continuity and preserving and helping the organization to maintain its brand reputation. Majority of the services can be worked through a remote working mechanism. So in case the client has a stable IT support system, we are more than happy to help them and make sure that the remedial measures are implemented in their framework. Next slide, please. This is a risk advisory portfolio of the firm. So we've spoken on on number 3, which is a business management service, which is a service which has been carved out to make sure that the business continuity risks are managed. There are also other services in the line of such as internal audit, internal financial control testing, SOP documentation, business health check, business intelligence, forensic investigation, IT risk assessment, physical tagging, MIS preparation, into ERM and ERP implementation. So in case beyond this also, in case there is a requirement, the firm is apt to handle and provide services. As mentioned previously in my presentation about the diversified service offerings, the firm also has distinguished consultancy practices with the like of transaction advisory, financial reporting, taxation advisory, human capital, consulting, and corporate and other regulatory advisory. Next slide, please. So I would like to conclude by saying that as a society and business community, it is important to imbibe the spirit to emerge stronger in midst of difficult times. It's the attitude and zeal to overcome challenges that would bring out the best in organization and its people. We at MBG are focused to flatten the risk curve of organizations and also committed to protect the stakeholders from dampening their spirits and courage in these testing times. On that note, I thank you for your patient hearing and taking out time for attending the session. I would also like to thank Rhenus Logistics for sharing with MBG a social platform to express our thoughts and reach out to an esteemed audience. Stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abhijeet, for that insightful presentation. Please hang on. We have a few questions from the audience for you. There's one question which says whether there is any guideline by the Government of India which will be circulated on standard pricing. That's one. And another part of the question is the fuel price input crude is so cheap. What's your interpretation on this?
So as regards the first question is concerned about standard pricing, I think so that would, as of now, I don't think so there has been any notification on that. But in passage of time, considering the lockdown, would, in case if it continues to get extended, we might be having some tangible guidelines to ensure that the operations and the business move forward. What about the second question, Anjali?
It says, what's your interpretation on the fuel price input crude being so cheap?
That I would say would require some time and deliberation, to be very honest at my end, because it has to be I would say based on a number of parameters which basically come to a, I would say, because the price being cheap. So anyhow, we'll park that question and we'll come back with a detailed response on that.
Sure. Thank you so much. We'll take one more question. It says, what are a few steps that a startup can take to prevent going out of business? Would a business health check only help MNCs and big corporates, or also can be helpful for SMEs?
So to start with, I think so that since we are, as a firm, we also deal with startups and we've been advising startups. One of the important aspects is to have a charter of entity level controls, which is a Bible, I would say, of a risk management framework. Those need to be there. Once the base foundation is there, yes, a business health check review would help to make sure that the costs which are being there, they are being fully optimized, and the organization, it is important that we'll make sure that they're leveraging on those costs, incurring only to the extent it is required, and making sure that the revenue doesn't dip down. So the profitable segments of business, and making sure that the revenue also moves in the line of projections, that can be addressed through a business health check model. We have been providing these services to clients and across the globe, and it has I would say given us tremendous response.
Great. Thank you so much, Abhijeet, for your input.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we conclude, we would like to quickly do a second poll, which is very interesting. It says, does your organization have a business continuity plan, which is coming on your screen right now? So I would request the audience to put in their responses there, please. Okay, so I'm closing the poll right now.
So here we see the results of our poll conducted. So with 36%, our attendees have voted for BCP needs to be stress tested to evaluate risk coverage. And on number 2, BCP was designed previously but needs a revision. So I think the result of this poll shows that the preparedness for such an event like COVID-19 was not to the extent that we wish right now. So I'm sure that we can prepare in future our BCP according to the learnings that we have. And I'm sure MBG can help the attendees in doing so. So we would thank you very much for attending our webinar. We wish you a good week ahead with less technical glitches and wish you all the best. Stay healthy and hope to see you soon.